All right. Welcome, everybody. Good morning. It may be afternoon for some of you. We are so excited to see you here for this webinar that we have today, Advancing Racial and Social Equity in Wisconsin Farm to School, Strategies for Investing in Historically Underserved Producers, hosted by National Farm to School Network. And we have two amazing presenters from REAP Food Group and UW-Madison Extension, Dane County. Next slide. A little bit about National Farm to School Network, or NFSN. Our mission is to increase access to local food and nutrition education to improve children's health, strengthen family farms, and cultivate vibrant communities. Our vision is that we envision a nation in which farm to school programs are an essential component of strong and just local and regional food systems, ensuring the health of children, farms, the environment, the economy, and communities. Next slide. A little bit about why farm to school. One of the things that we like to say is that farm to school is a triple win, where kids win, farmers win, and communities win. It is one of the strategies that we can use to support communities, to help strengthen communities, and it's something where not just one party wins, but multiple parties and everybody can win. Next slide. And a little bit about NFSN as a network. Our core functions are information, networking, and advocacy, and connecting people to resources, other people who are doing farm to school work, as well as policy. There's a lot of work that NFSN does at the federal level, as well as supporting coalitions who are working at policy at the state level. Next slide. And one thing that we promote is our call to action, which is 100% of communities will hold power in a racially just food system. We have a description here that's also on our website. We have a vision of a strong and just food system for all, and we seek deep transformation toward this vision through farm to school, the way kids eat, grow, and learn about food in schools and early care and education settings. Around 2020, we embarked on a systems mapping process to sketch out, this was actually before 2020, to sketch out the next chapter of farm to school's evolution. And then after receiving input from our network of partners and members, one thing was very clear. Inequities based on race persist, and we will not achieve a racially just food system if we do not dismantle these inequities. Hence, our call to action of 100% of communities will hold power in a racially just food system. And this is a call to action that we work with our partners to work together towards. Next slide. And without further ado, I will pass it on to our amazing speakers. And I think Jess will be going first. And I wanted to share with everyone, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat and we will have time to answer questions towards the end. Thank you. Go ahead, Jess.
Hi, everyone. I will just start by introducing a little bit about myself, and then Allison is going to introduce herself, and then we will start sharing some information with you. But welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Jess Guffey Calkins. I'm a community food systems educator at UW-Madison. And so that's University of Wisconsin, Madison Extension in Dane County. And so I'm in southern Wisconsin, which is includes Madison. And so our community food systems program promotes thriving, just, and resilient place-based food systems through the primary areas listed here. And then I'm going to turn it over to Allison. Oops.
Awesome.
There.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. And I hope you're staying warm no matter where you are in the country. My name is Allison Pfaff, and I am the Farm to School Director with REAP Food Group. REAP is a Southern Wisconsin nonprofit based in the capital city of Madison. And we were originally founded using the name of Research, Education, Action, and Policy on Food Group. And while we no longer go by this full name, we continue these principles as we carry out our mission to transform communities, economies, and lives through the power of good food. We do this by being connectors. We connect local farms with businesses, with communities, and with schools. Check out our website on the slide, or you're more than welcome to email me directly, with my email being found at the end of the presentation. And with that, I'm going to turn things back over to Jess to get us started.
Thanks. Let's see if I can. Okay. So the project that we're going to be talking about today is called Advancing Racial and Social Equity in Wisconsin Farm to School, Strategies for Investing in Historically Underserved Producers. The opportunity for this project came from a Wisconsin Idea collaboration grant. And so these fund collaborations between UW-Madison faculty and extension educators in certain priority areas. One priority area included enhancing food production by Black, Indigenous, and persons of color, which prompted a discussion about tie-ins and connections between the work of Dr. Jennifer Gaddis, who is an associate professor in civil society and community studies, as well as the extension community food system programs farm to institution work, as well as the additional farm to school work led by nonprofits in the community, including Reap Food Group. So the work that we're discussing here today is just one part of the project that was funded. The other component of the grant project, which was led by Dr. Gaddis, focused more on school food service, labor, and wages, and we'll point you to more information about that towards the end. Our full partnership team included faculty, staff, and students from the UW-Madison School of Human Ecology. And then we also had an amazing 5-member advisory committee who provided guidance throughout the project. Okay. So one thing we wanted to mention as a framework for this is that our project as a whole is rooted in the pursuit of values-aligned universal school meals and as defined by the National Farm to School Network. And the work discussed today focuses on farm to school procurement as an important strategy for sourcing good food and supporting economic and racial justice. Currently, relatively few historically underserved food growers and value-added producers have access to farm to school contracts. So advancing racial and social equity in Wisconsin farm to school requires equitable access to farm to school markets. So the study that we are presenting today addresses a pressing research need by identifying the most promising strategies for increasing historically underserved producers' access to farm to school markets. In this project, we identified 2 primary study objectives to pursue. The first one is around examining the current landscape of historically underserved growers and value-added food producers in Wisconsin and their current access to farm to school markets. We wanted to focus on understanding the experiences of Black, Indigenous, Hmong, and other producers of color with farm to school procurement. Secondly, we sought to identify the opportunities and needs of historically underserved growers and producers to participate in farm to school markets and identify what could help make the farm to school market more accessible and profitable. I also want to mention that as we began this work, we did a literature review and of course drew from and referenced throughout the work other studies and projects that have happened that are connected to or related to this particular work. And we especially drew inspiration from multiple projects in our neighbor state of Minnesota, carried out by the university as well as the Department of Agriculture, and that addressed unique barriers of BIPOC producers related to farm to school. So that's some information about our starting point. I also want to mention that for this work, we connected with producers who identify as historically underserved. And the USDA describes historically underserved farmers as producers that have been historically underserved by or subject to discrimination in federal policies and programs. So producers that fall under this category include beginning farmers, socially disadvantaged farmers, veterans, and limited resource farmers. So for our project, we had a total of 38 participants, and we considered that number of participants to be a representative sample size for this subgroup of Wisconsin producers. We determined this in relationship to the number of producers who were participating at the time in the Wisconsin Local Food Purchase Assistance Program, who identified as BIPOC and or socially disadvantaged. A little bit more to share about who we connected with before we give more information about what we talked about, what we discovered. So we launched a statewide survey in February 2023, and we also held 6 focus groups between February to April 2023. We gathered a total of 38 survey responses and had 21 focus group participants. This map shows the distribution of producers that participated in the survey, which indicates that there is a good distribution across the state of producers reached. So overall, there were about 23% of survey participants in the northern region of the state, 23% in the central, and 54% in the southern. And then for focus group, it was about 20% northern, 4% central, 76% southern. So one of the findings of our work is that we found that 1 in 4 historically underserved producers is currently selling to a Wisconsin K-12 school, which was also equal to 10 of the 38 surveyed. Few things to mention about that. Of the 28 respondents who are not currently selling to schools, 15% of them had sold their products to schools in the distribution area in the past, and 85% had not. Another thing to note is that all of the respondents who used to sell to schools in the past were interested in doing so again. Additionally, of the 19 survey respondents who are not currently selling to schools, have not sold in the past, and have not tried selling to schools, 89% of those folks we found are interested in selling to their distribution area. So overall, with a lot of these points that we came across, it demonstrates strong interest in accessing the farm to school market and indicates that there may be barriers hindering access. This just wanted to share this particular table that represents the number of survey respondents selling different types of products. So you have a sense of that as well. Okay. And then at this point, I wanted to get a little more into the information from our survey. So I mentioned that we felt there was an indication that there might be some barriers, and of course, also knew that had been discovered in some of the other studies and projects that we had looked at. The National Farm to School Network underscores that policies addressing the historical and ongoing inequities between Black, Indigenous, and people of color farmers and their white counterparts are ultimately necessary for BIPOC producers to experience a level playing field on which to participate in farm to school. So that's a quote from the Farm to School Policy Handbook. And so that was something that we were keeping forefront in our minds. In this project, we sought to gather very in-depth information around barriers to accessing farm to school markets. We did this by asking questions from many different angles, including both open-ended and more specific questions. More nuanced and detailed data about barriers would help us develop specific recommendations tailored to address the barriers, and we'll be sharing about those recommendations as well. So through this research, there were 4 main categories of barriers to accessing farm to school markets that were identified. So those are shown here: knowledge, price, seasonality and infrastructure, and food safety. And I'll be sharing a little bit of information about each of those categories. And we will also put, and I don't know if Allison, maybe you can put in the notes or in the chat, the link to our website that will have access to the full report if folks are interested in accessing that. So as far as knowledge, in the knowledge category, some of the things that we found through connecting with folks is that many producers are unsure how to begin cultivating a connection with schools. Many folks feel overwhelmed by the process. There are also many producers that had a lot of uncertainties about schools' needs and accommodations. And so that might include what products schools are looking for, what form the products could be in, what quantity, delivery schedule, and then also especially a question around if there is product flexibility in case of growing season challenges, and if there are any resources or programs or incentives for schools to purchase locally. So for producers to access the school market, a lot of conversations came up with the idea that they would need some additional people to support that process. There's many producers, of course, that are already at or above capacity and do not have the energy to navigate the farm to school process on top of everything else that they're already doing. In the price category, some of the pieces related to this are that producers are unclear about what price point they should set. A lot of the small producers in particular are concerned with the profitability of selling to schools. There's a lot of concerns that producers might not be able to compete with the larger farms and corporations, including an example of Cisco was mentioned for the school food market. There's also a pretty serious concern from producers that they might not be able to sell their products to schools at a price point that reflects the value of their products. So producers were expressing a bit of a lack of knowledge around typical school food market prices and what to charge for the contracts. Next up, under seasonality and infrastructure, one of the frequently mentioned concerns from producers and especially vegetable farmers is that their prime growing season is during the summer when school's out of session. So in order to sell to schools, producers would possibly need access to summer school markets or storage infrastructure, or other ways to extend the season so that they can safely store their products until school is in session. And many producers who have attempted to sell to schools name distribution as one of the biggest challenges, which included the convenience of the delivery location, delivery frequency, vehicle needed, receiving logistics around when the products can be delivered, and what infrastructure schools have for accepting deliveries. And lastly, under food safety, there were producers who had significant concerns about the food safety requirements for selling to schools, including on-farm certifications and inspections, as well as aggregation, distribution, transportation, and processing components required for getting food from farm to the schools. It was mentioned that it would be advantageous for growers if schools or local food supply chain partners could process the raw form of their products. And then that could be something that, came into the conversation regarding food safety concerns. So we just want to kind of take a little break from us talking at you here for a minute and kind of pose a question to the group. So we'll mention the question, and then if you have anything that you want to mention about it, you're more than welcome to unmute if you feel comfortable and just speak in. We can kind of share a little bit about that, or if you'd prefer, you can certainly also write it in the chat. But we just want to ask from folks on the call if there are other types of barriers that you've seen in your respective communities for accessing farm to school markets. If that may be underscoring some of the things that we've mentioned, or giving more specifics on that, or if there's just other situations that you want to call attention to. Again, welcome you to feel free to unmute. I'll pause for a little bit here and or share that information in the chat if you'd like. So I see in the chat that someone's mentioned that the schools themselves are often a barrier, and many don't have the ability to process or even wash whole fruits and vegetables. And then there's another kind of mention and question about how much language barriers played into these four main categories, or kind of played into the concept of barriers as well. So thank you for bringing that up. That's a great point. I would just say if feel free to pop anything else in there as well. I also wanted to mention too that after, I don't know if this was already mentioned, my brain is a little foggy from being sick recently, but we're going to continue in a bit with Allison sharing some more information. And then we also do have some dedicated time at the end for questions, as David mentioned. So we have some good time for questions and chatting as well. A couple other things that folks have mentioned include geographic barriers related to distribution. So sometimes the distance is too great, or might be too great from where BIPOC farmers are located to where schools are. And so kind of underscoring the need for an aggregation system. There's also a mention about from producers that delivery is a challenge. Having to make many deliveries to multiple schools in a district could take a full day. And again, a mention of very rural schools and that sort of transportation and delivery piece being a challenge. Wage issues hinder the ability for school districts to hire employees with experience or the ability to provide quality training opportunities. And as well as an add-on to that is that even when training for staff can be provided, there's little time and funding. And then also a mention about insurance requirements where some districts might require on-farm site visits, which may seem invasive. So thank you so much to folks, and you can feel free to put more in. Thanks for the sharing, and I'm going to send it over to Allison.
Wonderful. Thanks, Jess, and thank you all so much for sharing. We'll have another opportunity here at the end of the presentation to chat some more about recommendations to these barriers. But from the study, to address the barriers that we found, 5 recommendation themes emerged. First up, funding for infrastructure, supplies, and labor. These are needed up front and in some form that guarantees to lessen losses from unexpected events where no sale of product will take place, such as drought or crop failure. With this guaranteed funding, producers are better able to take on the risks associated with scaling up and commit to growing food for schools. And while the study focuses on the procurement aspect of farm to school, many producers noted that they participated in the educational realm of farm to school already, starting seeds with students or growing produce in school gardens with connections to cultural heritage, such as Hmong bitter melon. With this, financial support is recommended for producers to educate schools and students as they best can tell their stories. And this financial support can also be a vital source of income for producers in the off-season. Continued support for making connections and building relationships between producers and schools is recommended, along with price support incentives for schools to purchase local foods, with incentives to purchase from historically underserved producers especially encouraged. And last but not least, aggregation and distribution to support to help producers lessen the number of hats that any one of them has to wear. Now, with these recommendation themes, we then divided them, expanded upon them, and directed them to 3 specific stakeholder groups: policymakers, schools, and support organizations. Policymakers at the local and state level play an important role in making farm to school more viable for producers and schools across the state, as well as creating policies and programs that embed racial and social equity. While the report includes a number of recommendations to policymakers, 2 in particular we would like to highlight include: create or bolster funding to support local food purchasing in schools and supply chain infrastructure, and create a statewide effort for farm to school, similar to that of the Local Food Purchase Assistance Program, or LFPA. Now, in regards to local food funding, Wisconsin should consider mimicking the Local Foods for Schools program, through which the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction issued non-competitive subawards to schools and aggregators to help address supply chain issues, with instruction to use the subawards for local food purchasing targeting small businesses and/or socially disadvantaged producers. State policymakers could also consider creating an additional or lump sum reimbursement program or matching reimbursement up to a certain amount. Now, a number of participants in this study noted current participation in the Wisconsin Local Food Purchase Assistance Program, LFPA. Wow, a mouthful. And while the LFPA services food assistance programs, many schools face the same purchasing issues. Producers referenced LFPA initiatives that they believe would be helpful for farm to school, including upfront funding to purchase supplies, outsourced transportation logistics, and a dedicated team to answer questions and provide food safety support in the individual farmer's first language, whether that be English, Spanish, or Hmong. Be sure to check out the additional recommendations in the report, which include recommendations to review state-level licensing requirements to identify opportunities to streamline regulations to meet the needs of the local food supply chain, and financial support for farm-to-school support organizations to convene, create, and provide local and regional strategies for moving local foods into schools. We would like to underscore that critical to the success of any policy or program is moderating the administrative requirements and paperwork needed to collect impact data, so that the paperwork for these incentives is manageable by both producers and school nutrition programs. Now, while regular contact between school nutrition professionals and producers is needed to build relationships, allowing for each to provide feedback to one another and build creative solutions to any challenges. School recommendations include adopting values-based or values-aligned procurement models, piloting farm-to-school programs, providing stipends for producers for in-school education, and pre-season or forward contracts that allow producers to plan ahead early in the season. That said, in Wisconsin, forward contracts are not commonplace in farm-to-school. And even when they do exist, they're not ironclad guarantees of payment, leaving producers vulnerable to financial loss due to crop failure or unforeseen circumstances. For these reasons, producer support programs like the previously mentioned LFPA are recommended, which provides 20% funding up front to producers, lessening the risk of growing for schools. And this is especially true for small and beginning producers. And it also provides a platform for strong farm-to-school relationships to be built. And state agencies, community groups, nonprofits, and other support organizations need to continue to support building connections and relationships between school nutrition programs and producers. These organizations are encouraged to create a central place for producers to find farm-to-school information, build a farm-to-school network to connect producers, schools, and others across the supply chain, and create paid train-the-trainer opportunities, allowing for experienced producers to provide education to fellow producers. Of note, as a support organization, REAP Food Group is thinking about these recommendations as we consider upcoming grant opportunities. A current project that we hope to find funding for school year 24-25 is a farmer in residence program. Following the recommendation, we heard that producers want to provide education on farming to students and need to be compensated for their work, both in the field and in the classroom. And now I'd like to take a moment for people to put in the chat, are there any strategies that folks have found in their communities that weren't mentioned on our call here today? I'll take a few minutes. Feel free to unmute or put those in the chat. Any brave souls want to unmute and talk about any strategies they found successful? Well, please feel free to continue to put those in the chat as I continue on, and we can circle back around with them at the end. We want to note that we see the recommendations from the study as being one of 3 inputs that are key to fully supporting school nutrition programs. With free school meals for all students, workforce development and improved compensation for school nutrition professionals, and local food purchasing incentives to support farm to school. School nutrition programs are able to make fresh, nourishing scratch-made meals, which increases student participation, leading to greater revenue for the school nutrition program, and the ability to provide high-quality jobs for school nutrition professionals. In turn, growing culinary skills and capacity to use Wisconsin and regionally grown foods. All of which leads to nourished children, strong schools, caring communities, and thriving local farms. In regards to the two other inputs, Wisconsin is actively working to pass legislation to offer free school meals at no charge to all K through 12 students through the work of the Healthy School Meals for All Wisconsin Coalition. The work of this coalition is one of many efforts by states across the country to offer no-cost school meals to all students. As of today, I believe we're at a total of 9 states that have passed legislation for free school meals for all, including our neighbor of Minnesota. In regards to workforce development and improved compensation, we mentioned at the top of this presentation that this study is one half of a larger Wisconsin IDEA collaboration grant. And if we go to the next slide, the other half of this grant project is the Hungry for Good Jobs, the State of the School Nutrition Workforce in Wisconsin report, created in partnership with the Healthy School Meals for All Wisconsin Coalition and the School Nutrition Association of Wisconsin. Led by Dr. Jennifer Gaddis of the University of Wisconsin-Madison, this study and report focuses on labor, wages, and benefits within the state. As we know, school meals continue to be a vital source of nutrition for Wisconsin's K through 12 students. But ongoing challenges with worker recruitment, retention, and compensation make it difficult for school nutrition programs to provide reliable, high-quality meals. This report seeks to support school nutrition directors and advocates by providing a better understanding of the systemic challenges of and opportunities for improving labor and compensation in Wisconsin school nutrition programs. Check it out via the QR code or link on the screen. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to Dr. Jennifer Gaddis. In closing, Farm to School offers a powerful opportunity for the state of Wisconsin to prioritize racial justice, economic development, and environmental sustainability. We hope the findings of this study produce actionable results across the state, as well as provide inspiration and action to others. With that, we'd like to thank you for your time today. We'd also like to extend a thank you to one more researcher who was not able to be on our call here today, Allison. She was integral to getting this report up and going. And she's with the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And we also want to say a special thank you to David and the National Farm to School Network for providing this platform to share our research. If you'd like to read or share the full report, you can find it at the QR code or link on the screen. And please feel free to reach out to Jess or myself if you have any questions. With that, I'm going to turn things back over to David.
Thank you, Allison, and thank you, Jess. If we can get some applause reactions or in the chat or Zoom reactions, thank you, everyone. And thank you to our speakers. We will be sending a follow-up email with a recording of today's presentation and slide deck, along with a survey to share your feedback on what you learned from today, what you thought about today, and what you would like to see next. Something that I always like to say is we love to be able to come together to talk through what's happened, and then always ask, how can we use this to now inform our next steps? How does this fit into what's next? And so we will share a chance for you to share your feedback on what you would like to see next. We also invite you to stay connected. As an individual, we invite you to sign up for NFSM's newsletter to stay updated on future webinars and offerings. And as organizations, we invite you to apply to become an NFSM partner. Links will be on the presentation, which will be in the follow-up email. And so without further ado, we wanted to have a few moments if anyone had any questions for our presenters. We had one question in the chat from Michelle. And if you have anyone has other questions, feel free to chat in or unmute yourself. So first question, Michelle. I may have missed this, but I'm wondering how large were the farms you researched, and did they also share barriers to entering into more complex and lucrative supply chains?
Yeah, I can, thank you. Thanks for that question, Michelle. I'm actually going to I put in the chat a link directly to the report, and that is relevant information to share about the size of the different farms. And so we broke down, we have like a table that we put together, a couple tables about to describe the participants as far as their gross cash farm income and their years of farm operation. And so there's the majority, or I mean, it's certainly small farm. I mean, not only small farms, but especially micro farms. In fact, I remember when we were meeting with our advisory committee early on and kind of designing some processes, and we talked about having some questions, asking people about their size of farms. The folks that we have, the growers that we had on our advisory committee, a number of them are very, very, very small farms. And so they kind of, when we looked at just using kind of the standardized income categories, just using the lowest one of the standardized income categories would kind of obscure the degree of actual size of some of these very small farms that we might be connecting with. So that's why we broke it down even further to, less than $5,000 gross cash farm income. And so 9 of our respondents fell into that category. And then kind of as you go up, 5 to 10,000, 10 to 50,000. So there were, of the folks that we talked to, there were 8 individuals that were their farms make over $100,000 a year, but everyone else was under that $100,000. And then, like I said, we kind of have it broken down even more beyond that. And then just mentioning, because we also wanted to gather a little bit of information about years that folks have been operating. And so we had on the lower end, we had 2 folks that had been operating less than a year, and then the majority of people had been operating between basically 2 to 5 years, 6 to 10 years. And then we did have about 9 people who had been operating more than 11 years. So there's some bit of variation too, as far as brand new, and then kind of more medium length or more seasoned.
And I'll also add on to that, Jess, real quick. Just thinking about some of the focus groups that we did with farmers too, when they, there were a few that come to mind as having attempted to sell to very large school districts, and just noting GAP certification. Some of our larger school districts require that, or there was some confusion on what was required or what was not. So that was just following up on the second part of that question. That seemed to be questions from our farmers, and what was tying that back to that LFPA program that a lot of our farmers were currently participating in. They really appreciated having a dedicated team to ask questions to about food safety. Is GAP required? Is it not? Or other certifications required? So just to add on to that. Any other questions from folks? Yeah, Kelsey.
Yeah, I've got a question. I'm just curious what the relationship or how this research has impacted relationships with the school entities and school leadership. Like, have there been discussions with Department of Education around some of these recommendations in terms of stipends and forward contracts? Like, how are we bridging the gap between producer barriers and some of the folks that like hold the power to make structural and infrastructure change to how these relationships can then be reinforced through ongoing local food procurement?
Really great question. And Wisconsin just hired 3 farm to school specialists at the Department of Public Instruction, which is the state office that oversees our school nutrition programs. And we've been in conversation with those individuals sharing this report, talking through recommendations, chatting through what their upcoming plans are. So there are those back and forth conversations with the school nutrition team at the Department of Public Instruction, specifically with those farm to school specialists. I think I saw a couple on the call, but I'm not going to put them on the spot right at the moment. But we are having those ongoing conversations back and forth and chatting about, you know, what they're going to be working on and offering our thoughts from this report and how working with farmers and producers.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. And I see a question, it looks like from Shannon. Was land access for BIPOC farmers for scaling up addressed in any part of the strategies? That's a really great question, and we didn't call it out specifically in our strategies, but land access was something that farmers brought up. I'm thinking especially of one of our focus groups in particular. And so I know that is also a strategy that has been discussed, but we didn't call it out specifically in the presentation today. Jess, do you have any recollections of other information from land access?
Yeah, I think not specifically. That's a really excellent question, and sort of something that we haven't gotten in. Sorry, my cat is like in a paper bag right now in the background. So not something that we got into much more in depth in this particular project, but of course, and certainly a very key piece of this whole conversation. I mean, I do remember when we spoke with, we did a focus, let's see, sorry, did you mention the focus group out in Milwaukee?
Briefly, but yeah, the focus group in Milwaukee specifically comes to mind for land access.
Yeah, for sure. So, but no, I don't have anything else to share on that. And
I did see in the chat, Amy, thank you so much for adding that in. There is a grant that's working to address land access specifically for Indigenous and tribal nations of Wisconsin. And I know at REAP Food Group, that is something that myself, I'm not working on, but that is something that we are talking about as a team and thinking about how can we make sure that farmers and producers who want to grow, whether it be for schools or whether it be for community or restaurants, have access to the land that they need to grow on. Great question. Other questions at all? Or comments too, or strategies that you have found to be helpful in your communities?
I pulled a question, or was looking at a question from earlier in the chat, way back towards the beginning, from Chris, I believe, that was around some questions around the primary factors setting or driving the price setting barrier, if there were primary factors. And so we kind of asked, you know, were there challenges setting price points different from other markets like CSA, farmers market, et cetera? Was it a situation where they were hoping the growers were hoping to set reasonable prices within schools' available budgets, but not having that info? And then also a question of were folks sort of assuming that they'd need to set prices that compete with broadline distributors' cheap food? So I think like that, yeah, I mean, I don't know that there was, I wouldn't necessarily say that there was one of those that stood alone or stood apart from the rest, but I do think that, I mean, all of the things that you mentioned, Chris, are certainly some of the different pieces of it. And that kind of, I mean, a lot of, you know, when we talked about the different barriers that we discovered, you know, we grouped them to some degree within those 4 categories, but then of course there's certainly a lot of overlap and interconnection between the 4 categories. And so some of this, you know, this is just kind of bringing me to the knowledge category. And what I mean is like, yeah, like you mentioned, like not necessarily, it's sort of this, a lot of unknowns. It's like, okay, well, what folks kind of expressing, like, what should we set our prices at? You know, is it the same? Just like sort of not knowing, like, do we set them the same as we do, like you mentioned, for these other markets? Is that reasonable? Is that feasible? Really just like not having, in a lot of cases, a much particular sense of the school's budgets. And, if there's like programs or resources or things like that, that schools can tap into in order to be able to have a bigger budget for sourcing locally, that type of thing. And I don't mean to, make it down to like, not only is it a situation where there's a lot of these questions and some uncertainty, but then also, unfortunately, in a lot of cases, it's just not clear for producers always to know where to where to get the answers to those questions. And so, like if you have a question about something and it's in a certain category and it's real clear, like, oh, I just call this one number, this one resource, and you get a straightforward answer, then that's easier to run down. But I think that, just a combination of like whether some of the folks that we talked to had tried in some ways to make some contacts and reach out, and maybe they in certain cases like ran into some dead ends, or talked to someone, didn't get a phone call back, or talked to someone, got some different information from someone else. So it's kind of, of course it depends on the school and the district and that sort of thing. And certainly there's some schools and districts that are, if purchasing locally is a particular priority for them, then they have some more processes and information. So I'm not trying to say, it's the same, or that it's always an issue. But it just can vary quite a bit in different cases. And so I think it becomes a little bit of like kind of a circular thing, or not knowing where to start, because it's like when producers don't necessarily there's so many unknowns about like whether selling to this market would even be feasible and what that price point should be. Then it can kind of be, and not knowing then like how to find out that information, it can be kind of hard to think to strike out and say like, okay, well, I'm just gonna, I'm gonna put time and energy into even trying to figure this out. Of course, there's limited time and energy, and so it's not always clear whether that's gonna pay off to like try to put some time and energy into trying to even figure out how to get the information about whether this is something that's going to be worthwhile. I'm rambling a lot. It was like, I'm just, again, thinking back to different focus group conversations and how sometimes it's just sort of, if there's enough unknowns, even just a few, then it's hard to have enough purchase to know whether it's really kind of worth the time or the energy to pursue finding out.
Jess, I just wanted to call out a few messages I noted here in the chat, some ideas and some additional questions. Looks like Shirley had mentioned talking about kind of that disconnect that was mentioned from the growing season to when schools are in session. And Shirley had mentioned that Feeding America in Georgia uses IQF, or the art of flash freezing, to address the disconnect, the seasonal disconnect there, so that farmers are able to flash freeze their products and sell them to schools at a different time. And this is especially top of mind, and a great comment thinking about right now, Wisconsin is looking at the, and I'm going to get the acronym wrong, but there's a grant out there that's addressing middle of the supply chain. So not necessarily the producers, not the buyers, but folks in the middle, from folks who are processing to just aggregating and distributing products. So this is something that folks could be looking at here in Wisconsin, and I believe these grants are also across the country of addressing this disconnect for farmers and for schools. There's a really great comment above that about insurance, and I think this is where we go back to in Wisconsin. We were hearing from farmers about who are currently participating in the LFPA. They were able to have that person, they were directly able to ask about what are the insurance requirements, what are the needs, really starting to do some like group, coming together as a group to answer some of those questions, and they appreciated that. Want to just open it up real briefly. Does anyone else want to come off mute and talk about it? Have they had experience, overcoming the insurance challenge, or they had challenges themselves? There's a little bit more in the chat. Thank you, Amy, for putting in the acronym, the Resilient Food System Infrastructure Grant from USDA. And yep, talking about, looks like, you know, the insurance is a barrier. One thing I did want to call out, I saw another question in the chat too, is how did we reach out to farmers for this study? And we did it through a variety of methods. We reached out to different groups that had different directories. I know I've seen in the chat the AmeriCorps Farm to School directory, which is hosted on the Department of Public Instruction School Nutrition site, which hosts both schools and farmers who are looking to sell. REAP Food Group has connections with farmers all throughout southern Wisconsin as well as the state. So we sent out information about our study and our survey and our focus groups on those channels. We also asked for school nutrition directors and farmers markets to share this information with folks who are part of their market or folks they may purchase from. And then we also had one of our graduate students working on the project do research just on the web to see what farmers may not be on a directory or a listserv, and if there's a phone number, if there's an email, or if there's a social media handle that we could reach out to. And then some was by word of mouth. So we really tried to just get it out there in any means possible. And right when we were starting the study was the same time that the Wisconsin LFPA program and the Wisconsin LFS program were really kicking off. So there was some trying to rely on those groups to get the word out about this study. I know we've got about 5 minutes left. Jess, David, anything else or any other questions we'd like to address?
Did you already mention I know Lindsay had a comment in the chat about I'd love to have an opportunity to connect with other states also working on healthy school meals for all legislation. I mean, we don't necessarily have the time to fully delve into that right now, but yeah, did you already touch on that or mention that, Allison, as far as that comment? Or
I didn't, but
okay.
Lindsay, feel free to reach out to me. My email is at the end of the presentation, allisonph@reapfoodgroup.org. I also think David could connect you up, and I think I maybe saw Ryan Betts hop on as well. National Farm to School Network has been amazing at helping us to connect to with some other partners. So highly recommend any of those outlets, but I'm also happy to chat about our work with Healthy School Meals for All.
Well, I will just maybe share screen again here. I know that David's going to be sharing slides out afterwards, so we went through things kind of quickly, but if folks need to access any particular links or email addresses or that type of thing, I'll put, David, if it's okay, I'll just put up our slide and then I'll move on to the NFSN one so that it has the information and links that you have there as well. So yeah, I think just like as Allison mentioned, I mean, and as noticed by like the chat and the comments, this kind of work has certainly been happening in some other states, and in some ways this particular project is kind of like digging things up or just stirring things up a bit. And then of course there's you know, a lot of work ahead, as Allison mentioned, with the recommendations for how to take some next steps. And so we're just excited to be, like Allison and I and some of our other partners in Wisconsin are figuring out how to continue to connect and you know, just kind of keep these things in mind and figure out some of the troubleshooting and that sort of thing. So yeah. So I think I'll just turn it back over to David. Thank you.
Thank you, Jess, and thank you, Allison, for being our amazing speakers today. Thank you, everyone, for attending today and being part of this. As Shirley put here, well done research and presentation to hopefully move the needle. Agreed. And as I mentioned, we would love for you to stay connected. We want this to be one thing that we can build off of and continue this work and build off of this together. So as I mentioned, if you want to stay connected, please subscribe to our monthly and weekly newsletters, as well as organizations apply to become an NFSN partner. We will include all of this information in the follow-up email, as well as a survey for you to share your feedback. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great rest of your day, and we will see you next time.
Thank you, everyone. Much
Thank you.
appreciated.
Yeah, and if folks want, I know there's a little save chat function, so if you want to grab anything, conversations or links in the chat, you should be able to do that from the bottom of your chat screen with the little 3 dots. Just a little tip.
Love it. Thanks, everyone. Take care.